In this video, I'm going to talk about the aspects and typical conventions in a horror film, and things which I like and what I don't like about the genre. And to start off, I'm just going to talk about a very overview, short segment about general aspects of horror films before I go in deeply about the conventions. And so this section is a general overview of horror film aspects. They all consist usually of a good versus evil type storyline, usually a demonic being of some sort, whether that be supernatural or physically frightening and superior to the protagonist, is usually the antagonist. And usually the protagonist, if you like to call them that, is a young child, and they are often used as they seem more innocent. And people hate to see like innocent children and children in general get hurt, and because they're so much more vulnerable than an adult being, it makes the film a little bit more intense. So horror films generally use the aspect of using younger children to be whether possessed by a supernatural spirit, or to be maybe captured in some sort of aspect. They often do use teenagers as well. If they use teenagers, though, it's not usually for the innocence. It's usually for the fact that they're a bit, in some cases, people view them as stupid, a bit immature. They think they know what they're doing because they're at that age between childhood and adulthood. So just that bit in between. So they don't know what they're doing as such and the consequences, but they think that they do. So it kind of shows them, but people still don't want to see them get hurt. This is like in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre series. There's usually teenagers going after into the world of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And usually this like shows how immature they are, like exploring property that isn't theirs, as such. But again, it follows the same sort of line as the children, as they are kind of more innocent than an adult. But children are the main basis of a general aspect of a horror film. If you see a horror film, there's more than likely going to have a child in there. But I'll get into that more here later on in the video. But just to quickly wrap up this little segment, people generally use children as it can make it a little bit more scary for the audience, because it makes it, I feel, a little bit more grounded, and makes it seem that a bit more realistic, so people can connect with the film, and because it's more realistic, can make it more frightening. So the first convention I'm going to talk about in the horror films is storyline. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the conventions of the storyline in a horror film. Though I'm only making a short trailer for a film, the storyline is very crucial, as the storyline needs to be present in the trailer in order for the audience to look forward to the film. As if there's no plot shown and just mindless madness, action and horror shown, the audience will not be interested in the storyline. So I need to really make sure that I do about the plot. I need to make the plot relevant in my trailer. And the horror movie storyline is what I'm going to get into next. That was just kind of a general overview of trailers for horror films. So the storyline in horror films tend to differ from one another depending on what type of horror, whether it be a supernatural horror such as The Shining or Misery, where it all messes with the audience's head and makes them think. And though what's on screen isn't so much more visually frightening, but whereas it's a little bit more, if that happened to you, if you were in that character's mindset. So an example I have for this would be Paul Sheldon from Misery. He is obviously captured by one of his fans, Annie Wilkes, and she is obviously obsessed with him. And the reason that makes this very scary is because it's a very naturalistic and realistic, I mean to say, environment. Because if we were in that, it makes us think about if we're in that situation. Because as we all know, there are psychotic people out there. So a psychological thriller more relates into a realistic kind of feel, whereas there's also supernatural horrors, including ghosts and the devil, such as The Conjuring, and these focus more on, again, a slightly more realistic feel depending on what you believe in, whether you believe in ghosts or not. But these kind of consist of more visually frightening aspects, and this often uses a lot of the other conventions to build for a supernatural horror, because obviously you need music to build to a scene, and you also need to have the characters in as such for the supernatural horror, whereas you need like a visually frightening kind of ghost type character. Also, the example I used was The Conjuring. I'm going to use The Conjuring 2 as an example, where it has the nun as like the supernatural being, the devil, and this makes it far more atmospheric because it's a visually frightening character. Though some people may not believe it and may just view it as a film, some people may think this can actually happen, some people may not, depending on your views. I can't judge that. But the plot of a supernatural horror is more for the visually frightening and jump scares as such. And obviously jump scares rely a lot on the other conventions, which I'll talk to more in depth about in music, because the music is crucial to a jump scare. And also the last kind of horror film genre you have is gory slash-em-ups, such as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And this is more focused on visually frightening as such characters, such as the guy from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but more gore like Saw. And it focuses more on like blood and getting slashed up. And obviously some people hate blood, so this is like the ultimate horror for them. Others don't mind it, such as myself. But overall, these are like the three main different subgenres to the genre horror. But I'm going to describe a typical plot, which would be an innocent human getting tortured by a visually frightening demonic being who is out to harm, and then humans having to overcome this evil monster. And that is just a general overview of the horror genre. And personally, I would look to avoid the horror movie typical plot, as I feel as they can all be very similar, which will drive audiences away, and as they feel they've seen it all before. And kind of the example I'm going to use for this, even though they are directed and star some of the same cast, would be Insidious and The Conjuring. Though personally, I'm fans of both these films. When I watch them, I do feel they're a bit samey. Most horror films of the supernatural being do follow the same. Yes, there's the subgenres, but they all follow the same type of process of plot and storyline. I suppose you could say psychological horrors kind of mix in with psychological thrillers, and they can be a little bit elaborate, but I will talk about more of that when I talk about the film genre thriller. As I feel like the subgenre psychological is more for thriller films as such, so I'll get more into that. I would also like to try a different genre, as I feel it allows me to be more creative with the plot. As I just said, I feel like a psychological thriller may be the way I should be heading in this, because it allows me to add in more of my own twists and have a more detailed and interesting story for the audience to witness. And by the following, they mean that they will become more hyped for the film and likely to see it from the trailer, as it is something original and something the audiences have never seen before, instead of the same old horror film. So on this basis, I'm going to say that I want to avoid horrors on storylines, because I don't want it to become samey, and I want to try and put my own twists as such. I don't want to make the same old. It'd also be very hard to create a demonic being that looks realistic, because obviously special effects, CGI, you need all of this to create a natural and good casting to be a supernatural demonic being. So I feel like making like a terrifying ghost would be too far out of my reach for my skill level. Therefore, we need to tone it down a bit, maybe to the thriller film genre, in order for me to create a realistic sense of a movie and have it look visually good to the audience. Because if I try to make a supernatural being up myself by using CGI and rubbish costume and makeup, it would not have the same effect as having something a bit more simple but looking better because it's being simple. So on this basis, I've decided not to use horror on the basis of storyline, but I'm going to continue by looking into characters for the horror film genre. So continuing from the storyline, I'm going to talk about the characters in a typical horror film. The characters in a horror film are all very similar from film to film. Firstly, the antagonist is usually a supernatural being or someone who is physically superior to the protagonist and looks intimidating and is a force to be reckoned with. And as I've briefly mentioned in storylines and the general aspects part of this video, the antagonist is usually a very big demonic being. They usually, as I said, are a force to be reckoned with because they need to be something for the protagonist to overcome. If the protagonist hasn't got anything to overcome, or something that's not that kind of scary as such, the audience won't be interested. And as I mentioned, scary. The demonic being needs to look scary. If they don't look visually frightening, then there's not really much for the protagonist to have to run from as such, or be scared about. So, in films such as The Conjuring, Insidious, when Insidious especially has that devil with the red face paint, kind of looks like Darth Maul, and this creates, because of the visually frightening aspect to it, not only when you know the background of the character, it being the devil, it being possessed, it's standing in the corner of rooms pointing at little children. I'll get onto children later in this segment. But it kind of does show how creepy they are, and with the visual effects and makeup, this really creates a scary atmosphere with this character. This makes it seem that the protagonist has an obstacle to overcome, and the portrayal a great struggle for them to win. And I actually like the way of portraying an antagonist this way, as it shows the antagonist has a real fight on its hands and also creates more suspense in the film, creating a wonder if the protagonist can actually succeed. However, to create a supernatural being would be very hard for me to create, as I'm not that skilled in order to make it look good or realistic, as I've already discussed. I don't want to take something that's too far out of my skill level. If I do that, then it will end up looking rubbish, the film will look rubbish, no one will want to see the film, the trailer will be poor. Therefore, if I keep it simple and realistic, it may turn out for the better. And the protagonist in a horror film can actually depend on how you view the protagonist. So I'm going to give you two examples of protagonists. In most cases, people portray the protagonist as the victim in horror films, which is normally a child. This is because children are innocent, and it's worse for the audience to see a child in pain rather than an adult. As I've already discussed, when you see a little child in pain, people generally feel very sorry for them because they need protecting, they're innocent, they're still growing up, they're new to the world. And also, because children are so innocent and you think of them as they couldn't hurt a fly, and when they get possessed in a film such as The Conjuring, it makes it so much more terrifying to think that something so innocent and sweet can turn into something so demonic and actually kill you. So putting this twist on children is something that horror movies have done for years and years. But I personally think it does pay off, because it does give that creepy effect, which overall is what horror films are going for. And again, I like this idea as the children, as they are innocent, which creates more tension in a film. When something bad happens and they are in terror and they're in trouble, it keeps the audience interested in the film. Which I think that this is true. If you see a child in trouble, whether they've been kidnapped or possessed, you feel much more engrossed in the film. You know, is this child going to come out alive? No one wants to see a dead child on the screen, let's be honest. So the fact that they are in this much trouble, and especially in a film like The Conjuring when they're possessed, or Insidious when he's in the Further, as it's called, and it's very hard to help them, it does create more of an intense atmosphere in a horror film, which keeps the audience interested. And to show parts of this in a trailer of a child being possessed would make the audience interested. I know from personal experience of mine, when I watched The Conjuring 2 trailer before I went to see the film, which is a good film, I felt that I was much more engrossed in the film because, as I discussed, the demonic being in the corner of the nun being very visually frightening made me jump. And seeing the child in terror kind of made me feel like, maybe this is the one where the child actually dies. Is this child, it's in dire need of help? Which pushed me to go and see the film. And finally, or in some cases the other protagonist, as I'm going to discuss two, this being 2 of 2, are found in some horror films, and these are the people who have to save the children as they cannot save themselves from the protagonist. And this is a very generic character, as you see it in most film genres such as action, thriller, drama. There's always the hero who's got to save the day, basically. And for an example, in The Conjuring 2, when Ed Warren, played by Patrick Wilson, has to save Jeanette Hodgson, played by Madison Wolfe, from the demonic devil of the nun. Him being the hero, as he was a hero in the first one as well, it's very generic. He's obviously the big tough guy. He doesn't want to obviously see this child die. He has no connection to this child whatsoever other than he's formally there to help. But overall, seeing someone as a big action hero, everybody loves to see an action hero, especially if they're attractive, or for the women, or someone that the audience can relate to. Overall, it's something that the audience do want to see. And he's just got to be there. You're just not going to have a film where the child is just tortured by a demonic being. You've got to have someone there to fight back for the child. As we said, they are innocent, they need help. This film shows an example of all three characters, as I've just discussed, which is why The Conjuring is probably a film that I look to further if I choose to do the horror film genre. Or even so, I'll definitely take inspiration from the film because it has all these three characters. And I think The Conjuring and Insidious, personally to me, are a trademark in the horror film genre. And next I'm going to discuss the location, setting and mise-en-scène in horror film genre. So next I'm going to talk about the location, setting and mise-en-scène in typical horror films. The location of horror films are normally set in an abandoned, isolated kind of setting away from civilization. This creates tension in the atmosphere of the movie, as it gives a disadvantage to the protagonist and gives it a scarier feel to the movie, knowing that the protagonist has no escape. I like this setting as I feel it gives more tension in the movie. Me and the audience are more invested in the trailer and would want to see the film to see if the protagonist succeeds or escapes. So what I mean by like an isolated place is such as maybe you could say a forest. That's very, very generic. I would say maybe a house. This doesn't apply for all horror films, but just a fair few. Or in a house in the middle of nowhere. An example off the top of my head would be The Human Centipede. The first one, the doctor has a house in the middle of nowhere. And it kind of gives that feel of there's no escape for the protagonist, which creates more tension in the horror film, which I personally really like because I feel it's just another obstacle built on top of the protagonist in order for them to escape. And another +1 to the antagonist, meaning they have the upper hand as per usual. And personally, if I did go for the horror film genre, even though this kind of crosses over with a few other genres such as thriller, I personally really like this kind of isolated feel because it does give a more intense feel to a film, and in my case, a trailer. The lighting is also very dark, and usually very few lights in places which creates a dark and creepy effect to a scene. As it's the fear of the unknown, and the darkness does convey, evil beings. People are afraid of the unknown, and obviously we don't know what's in the dark. If you go into a room and it's dark and you can't see around you, you don't know what's there. It's unknown, fear of the unknown. I don't know why I needed to describe that in so much detail, but I did. And because of this dark, horror films being this dark kind of atmosphere, a lot of horror films the lighting is very dull, dark. I think this overall creates a very tense atmosphere once again, a very creepy atmosphere, which is why very, very dark lighting is usually used just in horror films. And I feel that I would like to use this. And another lighting colour which is often used is red, because it conveys evil and dangerous situations. Red isn't so much as it's just red on a room. Sometimes in this case it is, but usually it's very subtle hints of red, because people generally think of red as danger. It connotes danger, and personally I will not use red lighting because I feel that you need a very certain technique to get it right. Possibly, I'm not going to rule it out if I do horror films, but I feel that the next lighting colour I'm going to discuss would be much better, and that is blue. And it's often used, which brings out fear in characters and shows that they are vulnerable to the antagonist. And blue is kind of it's a subtle colour. I always thought blue showed sadness and very calm, but in horror films, it's often used to show fear. I did notice this in The Conjuring 2. If a protagonist is sitting in a room by themselves, say as such, and the demonic being enters, now sometimes you can't always see the demonic being, but it's just a black shadow along the wall. Often filmmakers, directors, technicians put a blue light on the protagonist, and it's the shading which I got on my face now. This side could be just very faintly blue, and I've noticed this in quite a few horror films, and it does make you, without maybe even realising, it kind of makes you think that they're in fear. The way I feel, this must be the same for other people, otherwise they wouldn't do it, is because it's kind of an unnatural colour, unnatural lighting colour on your face, and because it's not a very hot colour, it's kind of a cold colour, when you see something that you're not used to, your body freezes, whether it's been a bad dream. And I feel that the blue lighting conveys this, and I would very much try and like to use blue lighting in my trailer at some point. And finally, the props used in, well, not finally, the props used in a horror film depend on what the storyline is like. The most commonly used props would be guns, knives, fake blood, and masks to cover up the antagonist's face. All of this mixed with the location, the lighting, I like as they create an effect of the scene and create tension which the audience will be gripped to the trailer. So all of these conventions I've mixed that are in usually typical horror films, I would personally like to use myself. The costume in horror films again depends on the antagonist and whether it's a supernatural spirit or a huge monster-like creature. The antagonist would normally wear torn clothes with the effect of blood on them, which shows that they are dangerous from the colour, connoted from the colour red, and also shows they have killed, portraying them as very bad. The protagonists, on the other hand, usually have more normal clothing, portrays them as ordinary humans, meaning the audience can relate to them and feel more connected with the film because it makes it feel more realistic, like it could happen to them, and in horror movies you wish it wouldn't happen to you. I like both of these costume ideas as I think it makes people fear the antagonist, and the other portrays the protagonist as an ordinary guy, which means people can relate to him. So personally, all of these very generic horror film mise-en-scène pieces all fit together. I would like to use them if I used a horror film, especially the blue lighting. I don't know why I'm obsessed with it. I just think it's such a brilliant way to show fear in a person's face, as well as the dark lighting, but obviously that's very generic. And next I'm going to talk about the music in a horror film. So the music in a horror film is used to create an intense atmosphere in a scene, and adds to the scene whether it's adding in a darker atmosphere or a calm, relaxing one, depending on the contrast. If it's a scene where something bad's going to happen, such as they're about to bump into the demonic being, the music will be very intense building up to that. And before I move on to talk about more in the relaxing one, I want to point out that in horror films, the music is crucial. Like, it is crucial because the music builds and builds and builds, and just before, whether you see the demonic being or whether it's a false jump scare, the music cuts all of a sudden. This allows the silence is not only eerie and makes, obviously, when it goes ding, it makes it much more the audience jump more, but it also, because it's so unnatural for us to hear in a film, the music just drop all of a sudden. It does make it feel very unnatural and therefore frightening. And what I mean by a calm, relaxing music is in those what I like to call the daylight scenes. In the scenes where everything is nothing scary is happening on screen, but it's just that soft music which just plays behind the scene itself. It just makes your body feel calmer. Obviously, you feel calmer because you're outside in the settings outside, but you just feel much calmer. And obviously, this can be crucial into calming your body down. And then when the intensities come back up, you build that intensity back up, making it much more scary. Whereas if you just had the intense music all the way through, the jump scares would become pointless. The typical horror movie music is intense and slowly builds up to the climax of a scene, where it would then cut out, silence, leading mostly into a jump scare. And when it drops, it creates more tension, as the only sound you can hear is your own breathing. I like this as a way of using music, as I feel I can make the audience more interested in the film. And when the music drops, all of a sudden, it's unnatural, as I said, and it makes the audience grip to the film, because obviously the music cuts, they're going to be waiting for it, and then boom, they jump, they laugh, they enjoy the film. If you get a jump scare in a film and people jump to it, they're going to laugh about it and enjoy the film. So the music in a trailer, however, can slightly differ, because obviously, which is what I need to focus on because I'm doing a trailer, because it plays alongside the clip of the film, and in some ways it needs to have some kind of relevance to the trailer. It needs to build up the hype of the trailer so that people want to see the film. Music still drops before jump scares in a scene, scaring the audience, which, if you get the jump scare right in a trailer and it makes the audience jump, or at least, shiver, you've done it right, because then they're going to think, oh, there's going to be more of that in the actual film. Then they're going to go out and go and see your film. So the trailer has been successful. Though I'm making a trailer, which I need to make the trailer good, the whole point of making a trailer is so people see the actual film. And that's the mindset I've got to have in this coursework, is making a trailer so if the film was real, people would go and see it. So if I was doing the horror film genre, this is exactly what I'd be doing. Having music which connects with the film. You could start it off very subtle, like the relaxing music, but you've just got to have that clever twist where it just slowly, in some cases it's when they have the titles and it kind of goes distorted, the music goes distorted, I can't say that word, and then the music becomes much more intense, and then you have maybe the heartbeat, the thumping of the heartbeat, and because it's like your heartbeat and like quick flashing of editing, it all comes together and creates a scary experience in the trailer. And though I haven't got much to talk about music because it's very along the same level, overall I think if the music builds to the trailer, and if I do decide to do a horror movie, makes the trailer more scary, and then also use the cut where the music cuts and then jump scare, I think the music could be it's crucial to my trailer and getting people to come and see the film.
You're going to die.
Next I'm going to talk about the camera shots used in a horror film, and they're usually made to make the evil antagonist look bigger or more visually frightening compared to the protagonist. This can be done by using a low angle shot from below the character, making them appear bigger than they actually are. They usually use slight low angles though. When I say low angles, I don't mean all the way down looking up. I mean they're very, very slight, they're just tilted. And by making them just slightly tilted up without too much, people don't essentially notice that there's a low angle shot being portrayed. But what they do notice is the antagonist looking bigger than the protagonist, which is the crucial bit. So see, they don't tend to use high angles, or especially me, I don't intend to use high angles on my protagonists. But having the low angle on the antagonist does make him look bigger, and very slightly, without making it too obvious, can add to the character's presence. And as I said, I like the idea of this, as it allows you to choose a character that fits the role, but maybe on the short side. And you can make them appear bigger on screen, which is a very, very clever technique. Also, it's used with Tom Cruise a lot, because he's quite a small actor, but a great action star. So by having this low angle shot, it's used in many thriller films just to give that slight edge to the antagonist. And it's a very, very generic, typical shot used in horror films, but I very much think that it's a crucial one. Another camera shot often used in horror films is a point of view shot. This can be to create suspense in a scene, as the audience and character are almost one, and nobody knows what could be around the corner, which makes audiences feel more involved in the film and also makes a horror film creepier, as you do not know what is coming. I like this camera shot, as I feel it can be used to create a good suspense in a horror movie, and make the audience feel more involved and interested in the film, which is very important in a horror film, as it is all about getting people to come and see the film and make them become hyped to go and see it and then tell their friends. So I feel that using camera shots such as over the shoulder point of views to make the audience feel more involved in a horror film is generally what they do in the movies, because it kind of makes the audience feel more involved in the film and feels like they're actually there, which not only makes the film scarier, which makes it better, it also makes them feel that they have some sort of relevance to the film. And though the camera shots are very samey in thriller films, horror films, dramas, you name it, the camera shots are camera shots. But the way that I used in these different genres is what counts. And in horror films, they're used to create suspense. A point of view shot. In an action movie, it can be to show a cool chase, a run, same as a thriller film. In a horror film, it's used to create suspense. You're walking through a corridor, the point of view shot hits. When the character turns, you turn. No, I don't want to look around that corner. You have no choice. Boom. Demonic being. Jump scare. And there you have it. Creating more suspense. creating more intense atmospheres. This is what the camera shots are used for, and I very much intend to use them in my thriller, in my trailer if I do a horror film trailer, because if I do a horror film trailer, it needs to be scary. Camera shots are the perfect way to make a trailer scary. And the final topic I have to talk about, it's not a convention, it's just a very general wrap-up of horror film trailers. Horror film trailers are used to build suspense for the audience, and often to slightly spook them, leaving the audience wanting more from the film. As a result, they will go and watch the film. So the whole point of a horror film trailer is to make people go and see the film, and for a horror film, the way to do this is by scaring them in a trailer. If I decide to do a horror film trailer, that is what I need to focus on. Getting people scared. Which is why I'm swaying off the horror film genre. It's going to be hard to scare people when I don't have the visually scary makeup as such on other characters. It's just not going to work. So therefore, I'm swaying off of it. They normally have long takes of scary objects followed by a jump scare and a cut to black. So it'll be a long take of looking around the room. In the corner, there's a devil. For example, a ghostly spirit. Say she's standing there, you're like, music cuts, boom, right in the camera, cut. And then, boom, boom, another cut. Boom, boom, another cut. So, as I just mentioned, there's usually fast cuts between clips, creating a tense atmosphere, as everything is happening very fast and it looks unnatural. Making the audience feel a bit uneasy, which makes the film seem more scary, and then people want to go and watch it because it seems scary. If there's a lot of things going on in a trailer, and as much as I've been talking, you could have fit about 10, 20 trailers in the time I've been talking about this one genre. They're very short. You've got to fit as much in as you can without making it too complicated. And by having fast cuts of the demonic being, people running, people screaming, people trying to defend themselves, you've got 3 different ways of showing how people are reacting. They're scared, they want to fight back, you've got the evil presence. There's so many things you've got to show. The different characters, the location, all coming together to create one big horror film. I do like the style of how it gets people hyped in the first place. It's got to be fast, otherwise people will get bored. And horror films do create a mystery. So, to quickly wrap up, the horror film trailers do tend to get people hyped because they're very fast, people don't get bored, there's so much going on, so much scary stuff happening, you're covering your eyes. It all wraps together in a nice little bow to make people want to go and see the film. That's pretty much all there is to it. If you want to put it in the most simplest terms you can, a horror film trailer needs to be scary, it needs to be quick, and it needs to be fast editing, creating an unnatural atmosphere, making people feel uneasy. And personally, there's aspects of the trailer I do like the fast cuts, the cuts to black, the music stopping. But overall, in the horror film genre, I don't think I'll be capable, realistically, to create a demonic being in a way that I would want to be shown it like they do in Hollywood. Therefore, I'm swaying off horror films, but I'm not ruling it out yet, as I still have to talk about more genres to see if I like them. But overall, I feel like the horror film trailers are very interesting to watch, but overall, you've got to have the budget to make good CGI, you've got to have the skill, and you've got to have the know-how. I feel that I'd have to be very clever in the way I film it, I'd have to be very clever by casting choices. But overall, a horror film genre trailer is something I'd be interesting to do for my trailer.